Hi, and welcome to another episode of SEOs Getting Coffee. And today is a super exciting one because we don't have one guest, we have two guests, which is like, honestly, we started off with no guests whatsoever. And the guests that we have today are absolutely amazing. So we have with us Shelby and Jessie. And if you don't know Shelby and Jessie, you should know them. Shelby is an SEO for The Athletic, and Jessie is the SEO for The Guardian. Yay! Which is absolutely amazing.
Delighted to have you both.
Yeah, really cool to have you with us. I'll let you quickly introduce yourself. I know that you definitely want to introduce your WTF SEO, which is like the best name ever. So I'll let you go and say whatever you'd like to say.
Thanks so much for having us. We're thrilled to be here. Um, it is the morning after the debate, so I'm really happy that this podcast involves high quantities of coffee because I definitely need it. So I'm Jessie, she's Shelby. We're both co-founders and writers at WTF SEO, a newsletter that we started in 2021 to demystify and simplify search concepts for publishers. So our goal with the newsletter, which comes out every Monday at 1:21, is to teach people working in news and working in journalism key concepts and how to approach search, which is ever changing, so volatile, and such an important source of traffic for publishers. We're trying to teach people how to think about search, how to fit it into their broader audience strategies, and then sort of key concepts and tactics that they can take away and that they can use in their everyday, day-to-day professional lives. I used to work at the Globe and Mail. That's how Shelby and I met. I now work at the Guardian, US, and I'll hand it off to Shelby.
Yeah, thanks. Jessie and I have actually worked together before the Globe. We worked at a student newspaper together, and that was kind of when we first kind of met each other. But when it was at the Globe, there was this really funny, back and forth. I left the Globe in 2019, and Jessie was learning SEO on the job, and I had just done it at the Globe, and we were kind of going back and forth. And she was like, "Man, I wish we could just like take your brain and make it into a newsletter." And we were like, "Jessie, this is amazing. We need to take our brains and make it into a newsletter." So this was built out of a Twitter DM, and now we've built this small community that we are absolutely in love with and have so much interaction with and engagement with. Like Jessie mentioned, I started at the Globe and Mail. I left the Globe and Mail in 2019, took a little bit of a sabbatical from journalism, which I think was the best thing for me. Ended up becoming a personal trainer, and then the pandemic hit, and I decided that I missed journalism too much. So I ended up coming back into journalism kind of sideways, joined Mashable. Was at Mashable for a couple months. Really enjoyed it there, and then started at The Athletic, which is where I'm now. And now I manage our search efforts and strategy at The Athletic, which is great and really challenging, and as I'm sure we'll get into in terms of being part of a bigger publisher like the New York Times and having to deal with so much. But it's been really cool, like Jessie said, to really see how our newsletter and even just in our own newsrooms, like search has been evangelized, and we're able to kind of push forward some of these strategies.
Yeah, and I mean, like, obviously, I absolutely love the newsletter, and I think it's like spot on in terms of, with SEO, it can be such like a difficult topic sometimes if you're not trained in it, although there's no education, but you need to kind of like it's crazy, and your newsletter is brilliant at explaining it in a way that I know, because I come from a journalism background as well, I know that people will understand, which is a thing. Brilliant.
Yeah, the big thing for us was like we're both journalists first, and we both worked in newsrooms.
I was just gonna say, I think everyone that I met doing.
Go ahead, Jess.
Oh no, the Wi-Fi. I was just gonna say, before we started the newsletter and like built this community, I think the only people I knew doing SEO sort of either learned it on the job or were doing it as part of their job or off the side of the table. So it's been really cool to see in other newsrooms in bigger places and I mean small niche publications too with dedicated SEOs how different people are able to tackle this work and think about it. So it's been really interesting to see people how they learn it on the job and sort of what brings them to SEO.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Let's kick off with a question that is kind of a general one, and I'm sure everybody is interested to know, how is it actually working for such a massive publication like the two of you? I mean, how is it? What are some of the, give us the tea, as they say, you know, what are you liking it? What are you grappling with? We want to know all.
Yeah, working for a big organization is definitely interesting. Coming from the Globe was a national news organization, but we had one newsroom, obviously based in Toronto. We had foreign correspondents around the world, but most of our staff was in Toronto. And now working for the Guardian, we're one of three. Effectively, we're one of three newsrooms that operate around the world, and obviously we've got like some presence and visibility outside of the UK, Australia, and the States. So it's interesting to have that global perspective and to think about like every story is, I mean, like the national focus of the Globe just isn't the case of the Guardian. Like we just have a much more global focus, which is really interesting. And to be able to work with people from different parts of the world is always like super cool and interesting. Navigating big newsrooms, I'll say, is a challenge in of itself. Like when I worked at the CBC, I remember knowing, like walking into this huge building and thinking, there is no way, even if I worked here for 25 years, that I could know every person in this building. And I think then when I moved to the Globe, I was like, oh, this is the right size of a newsroom. I can know everyone, I can talk to everyone, I can be a visible face in the newsroom. And it felt right size. And then moving to the Guardian, which is a bigger organization broadly, is like, it goes back to that challenge of I could work here for 25 years, that CBC challenge, and not know everyone. So working for a big newsroom, I think the first, like the primary challenge is figuring out who to talk to about key things. Like it's like sort of a soft skill issue before it's like a doing your job issue. And then, yeah, like the other thing about working for a huge organization is figuring out what are the priorities in each, like what are the priorities for the entire brand? What are your overall objectives? And then what are the specific things that you can do and control within your own office and within your own newsroom. So it's definitely a different challenge from working at the Globe, but one that I think is like really interesting and fun.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry. We're having a little bit of Wi-Fi issues on my side. So hopefully you can hear me okay now. I just tried to switch to my hotspot, so I apologize. But to answer the big publication question, I've also found it really interesting to go from so many different big publication newsrooms and see the way that they've done things. Like Jessie said, the Globe and Mail was a national newspaper, but it was one newsroom. And when I was there in 2016, they were just starting to learn what audience development was and what search was, even as like an avenue for referral traffic. And so a lot of it was learning on the job. I learned literally how to do SEO in the Globe and Mail newsroom in the context of news. And it was really interesting to see even the way that we were adopting it there. And then when I left the Globe and went to Mashable, they had already kind of known what SEO was for entertainment content, thinking about these things. But it was in the broader scope of, okay, well, there's these trending stories, or there's these stories that everyone's talking about. How do we jump on them in a better way or in a smarter way, And it was really interesting to see Mashable, which is actually a very big newsroom. I didn't realize how big. And they have 4 different international newsrooms. But they were all so excited about the new idea of search, thinking about how do we, attach ourselves to some of these bigger stories of the day. Space, for example, was a really big one where they didn't realize there was so much opportunity because everyone was super interested in like the photos that were coming out of the telescope or what's going on or what are the new research developments. And so we really tapped into these spaces that people were talking about all the time, but it wasn't until they started thinking about them and started being like, oh yeah, people are thinking about this outside of our newsroom too. Why don't we just, put one to one together? And then when I came to the Athletic, it was already evangelized mainly because of my boss, Claudio Cabrera. He has, been at the New York Times, and then he came over to the Athletic. So when they first started, when he first started at the Athletic, they had already kind of understood where Claudio's approach was from. And then when I came in August of 2022, it was let's hit the ground running for the NFL season. And at first it was hard. There's a lot of people that want to do things specifically their own way. They don't think that, we have to do things for search, specifically, around NFL season, right? You're thinking about games, and people are so excited about their own teams, but they don't care about the general week 1 interest. They care about their team. So we kind of had to teach the newsroom, hey, it's about the teams, not about the week. And how do we approach that every day? Well, people are talking about, Patrick Mahomes throwing a great throw. How do we jump on that? And It's been interesting to see the way that newsrooms adopt things in different ways. And we talk about this all the time in the newsletter, but SEO is a customer service job. You're there to help them. You're there to make it easier for them in their newsroom, but you need to meet them somewhere. And sometimes that can be a little bit closer to them, and sometimes it's a little closer to where you want to be.
Yeah, and exactly. Just to build on one thing. Yeah. One thing
Go
that
ahead,
Shelby was
Jessie.
saying in there that I think is so interesting about working in news SEO and an audience is how much people think about and care about the brand of their publication. Like the thing that Shelby was just saying about coming into a newsroom that isn't evangelizing search and doesn't put a ton of um, emphasis on thinking about how we jump on a story that's trending or how we know that like this is a topic that people really care about. Every time we write about it, it does well, but how we build that into our brand. I think what's so interesting about that is like people, even if they're not thinking about the brand, they're thinking about your organization. And I think what's great about SEO, as Shelby said, is like customer service, but it's also about connecting what you know that people have interest in and what your brand is really your brand really cares about and making sure that there's a synergy there. Like I think SEO sometimes, and specifically in newsrooms, gets a bad rap because people have this outdated and incorrect
Yeah.
notion that search is about or SEO is about sort of malicious or bad practices or bad tactics or writing really low quality content in order to get clicks from Google. And I think one of the great things that we've seen about news SEO is trying to change that understanding in newsrooms and that thinking that really what we're trying to do is understand what is it that readers are interested in and how can we meet that interest in a way that is meaningful and in alignment with what we're already doing as a publication. So like trending news stories, like looking at Google Trends and just writing off Google Trends, like is a tactic but not really a strategy because it doesn't really say like what else can we do with this, right? How do we take something that we know people have interest in, which is what you should be doing. Like if you look at Google Trends and you see like, oh, I see a high volume of interest in this particular topic, the question is not how do we write that, it's how do we make sure we write that in a way that is authentic to our brand and will connect with readers. So it's been really interesting to see how much that mindset has sort of shifted around
Yeah.
news SEO.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And this is one of the things, like, I think you're completely right. It happens in other industries as well, but not as much as in publishers because journalism is, it's kind of has this higher standards, and which is correct, because the idea of journalism is to serve the public. So you have this thing coming in that might be seen as manipulating something. It's never going to be a so it's great. It's great that you're evangelizing that bit, and that it's we're moving away from it being misunderstood in publishing. I think
I
it's
guess
brilliant.
I guess that like knowing, I mean, SEO like helping you basically to kind of know your audience or kind of encouraging you to like really know your audience. Is that does it give you like, because obviously a part of like you've got to be at the forefront of everything, right? So you've almost like you have to know your audience so well that you can almost predict what the next kind of like what they're going to
Yep.
be looking for next.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
How do you approach that in terms of, is it literally just kind of being so dialed into obviously what they are going to be wanting in their next kind of content piece? Or are you, how do you do that? How do you operate in to kind of predict what the next kind of content would be, or what you would be working on next in terms of, being able to kind of predict what your audience might be searching for?
I love
Yeah,
this
that's
question. Yeah, I love this question because it's literally like it's journalism. You're literally just thinking about like what is the next story, what is the next storyline, what are people interested in, and I think that's one of the benefits of like news SEOs that have had a journalism background or been around news for so long is you get in tune with what your audience is thinking about. I'm going to use another sports analogy because I don't know if you know, but there's a lot of things going on in sports right now, like Euros and Copa and NHL drafts and NBA drafts. So even yesterday, for example, the NBA draft happened, and the number one story wasn't the NBA draft; it was Bronny James and Bronny James being drafted, and everyone wanted to know about Bronny James. Did he actually deserve to be drafted? He went obviously to the Lakers and things like that, and so a lot of the conversation wasn't about, hey, let's like win the NBA draft. What's the big, like, who was the number one pick? It was, is Bronny going to be drafted? Where is he going? Why did he get drafted? And then having that understanding that people are going to be looking that up more because that's the story. And so to be honest, we made a lot of our budget and our schedule around, okay, if Bronny goes, what's the plan? And then the NBA draft kind of fell into place from there. But you're totally right. like I think one of the things that's really interesting for us is understanding that audience and kind of being in tune with it. But Google Trends is a great tool to understand what are the stories that are coming out of an object, a theme, or a topic. Because then you start to learn and like you start to pick up on like little intricacies that are common and repetitive. I have a sociology background, and I find this so interesting because people are so in tune with themselves, but they're so habitual. They're always going to do the same thing over and over again. So every year when, a draft comes up or even an election, people are going to look up, election analysis. They're going to look up debate, who won the debate. who was the best in the debate. And last night, obviously, the big topic was Biden, and I'll let Jessie jump into this a little bit more. But there's like a big conversation of like, what's actually the story behind here, and what are people actually looking up?
And what I love about SEO is you get to think about, so I think in traditional newsrooms, the approach is very much editors and reporters know what the story is, and editors and reporters assign what the story is to follow. And I think that's totally valid and the way newsrooms should primarily operate, because they have hard-earned news judgment. And I think pursuing the story outside of Google Trends, I think, is the main thing that we should be doing. But I think also the value of audience and audience first thinking is you are trying to fill in those gaps of things that the reporters and the editors might not see. So we know that, every debate, people are going to be asking who's winning the debate, who won the debate, what time is the debate, how long is the debate, like very common questions that people just need answers to. And so I think like the great thing about Google Trends and the great thing about News SEO is you start with what are readers looking for, what are readers most interested in, and how can we fill that knowledge gap. And then from there, obviously, you can build out to the rest of your coverage to have like and one thing that I thought was interesting in the debate was how much of search interest was just about straight fact checking. And I think that's the particular context of this debate and the last debate and the one before that, about how important fact checking has become in the last 3 cycles, let's say. And I thought that was really interesting because people are not just interested in watching the debate in real time or following live coverage. They're also really interested in the key thing that we are able to provide, which is separating truth from lies in a live context, something that only really journalists are particularly qualified to do, or not only journalists, but primarily journalists are particularly qualified to do. And then just in terms of how do you build this into your newsroom? I think the important thing is monitoring it in real time, communicating in real time on Slack, or if you have to use Teams, I'm so sorry. But whatever your real-time chat channel is, communicating that, and then doing a debrief or a postmortem. Our last 2 issues of the newsletter were about planning for tentpole events and doing a postmortem after planned news, breaking news, and tentpole events. And so we've talked recently a lot about how do we think about covering an event, but also communicating things that go well and have an area of opportunity to improve on the next one, and communicating that back to the newsroom. So I think in terms of building this instinct as a news SEO or someone working in audience, the most important thing you can do is sort of review and do an audit of your performance on an important event, and then give that report of here's the things that we did really well on, here's the questions where we really showed up for our audience and where we really provided and showed off our value as an organization, and then also call out and give opportunity to talk about here are the threads or the pillars of coverage that maybe we missed, or maybe that we didn't have in the right frame or promoted in the right spot, that it didn't land with audience, or that we missed it entirely. And then I think doing that stuff and looking really closely at Google Trends to figure out what people are asking and what they're looking for before, during, and after an event is the best way to build that instinct, so that the next time around you just know predictably, okay, it's going to be Bronny James, or it's going to be the fact check, or it's going to be some other thing. I think the great thing about SEO and search is it is just readers. And I think we can kind of guess sometimes what readers are going to be interested in if we start with an audience first mindset.
Yeah, no, and you're spot on. I think this is the thing. One of the things that you were saying is around this relationship with the journalists, which to me, that seems like it's super, super important, because a lot of the times, even now, maybe not in big companies and big publishers like yours, but in a smaller publisher, there's this kind of disconnect between the journalist, the editorial team, and the SEO. And there's this misconception that SEO's role is just which really is just crazy, even after publishing, go in and kind of tweak the news article, which it just drives me completely mental. So how do you build those relationships? What are some of the mechanisms that you've used to get in there with the editorial team and to become not just somebody who messes with title tags?
Go to every meeting, be a nice person, and do a lot of training. I think those would be my 3 starting points. If a desk has a planning meeting monthly or weekly, good to get into the habit of just going to it as like a fact-finding mission to see how do they talk about stories, how far in advance are they thinking about stories, who are the people who think about or are receptive to your ideas, build up relationships with those newsroom advocates, like those people who will be your champions in the newsroom, and then do as much training as you possibly can, because search is best when it's when it shows up in every stage of a story. When you start with a look at Google Trends, and then you are in conversation with the reporter about like, oh, here's what we could do on this particular topic. Here's how we can make it sort of, 10x content. Here's how we can stand out from our competition. And really being a nice person and someone that people want to work with is like a huge undervalued thing. I think like being someone that people want to talk to is just like, it's the thing that sets you apart. Like so many of us are good at SEO, and so many of us know and can watch really closely Google algorithm updates, or we can tell you what are the important things to have on page, but like no one wants to work with a jerk, and people aren't going to come to you if you're not a nice person to work with.
Totally. And like one of the biggest wins I would say ever is if they start coming to you in your DMs or they start asking you questions, you did your job. Because Jesse's completely right. Like the journalism is sacred, and we always say that the journalism is first. The journalism comes first. It's all about what they want to do, and our benefit is that we have an eye on something that they just don't have time for. And so if we're working together on what they're working on, or they come to you and say, hey, I actually don't think this is the way I want to go with the story. I actually want to go this way with it. Is there any interest in that? That's when you know that you've built that trust. Jesse nailed it on the head. Go to meetings. Don't ask for things right away either. Like I find it very hard when an SEO editor or an audience editor walks into a newsroom and says, hey, we should do it this way from day one. A lot of it is listening. A lot of it is understanding how things already work. How are people already doing things? What are the gaps that they're missing? Like I said, people are so busy that 9 times out of 10, it's not that they don't want to do this. It's that they don't know that they should do it or that they need to include it. I'm going to come back to NBA again. A couple of days ago, we were like, hey, there's this like weird sideline to the NBA draft, just basically because there's no Wembanyama this year. People were asking, well, like, is it even worth watching this draft? And we're like, hey, this is kind of like a sideline that we didn't expect to come up. I know that you're not thinking about it because we're thinking about this, but is it worth it? And then you have that conversation and you allow them to show their expertise, which I think is another thing. Like when you allow the writer and the editor to show that they're the expert and you're just there to help them, they tend to trust you more. And it's all about trust, in my opinion. Like the second that I have an editor that's like, thank you so much for your help. We really appreciate it. You were, important to our work. That's when I know that I've done my job, regardless of what the numbers look like, because they've at least now trusted me so that, to Jesse's point, next time we're going to knock it out of the park.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The best,
go ahead, Jessie.
The best thing about working in journalism, the reason I love working in journalism, is you get to talk to people who are really dialed into to their particular beat, and they're so knowledgeable. And I just love having that expertise around you. And so I think like the first thing is that you just have to respect reporters and how much their integrity is everything. And so like I think some of the resistance that you get, like if you don't have integrity as a reporter, you really don't have much. So I think there's sometimes resistance in newsrooms because, again, it's like that outdated, old-fashioned understanding of SEO is sort of like a black hat tactic. And so I think like having as a starting point, like really just like a deep respect for your colleagues, their expertise, how they work, knowing that SEO, even though it's been around forever, is still very new to a lot of people. I think if that's your starting point, you're going to set yourself up for success much, much more.
Yeah, exactly. And it reminds me, I mean, it's interesting because while you were talking, it did remind me a little bit about the other kind of partner in SEO that happens in other industries as well, which is the developers. And it's a very similar kind of, and I used to buy cookies and I do still buy cookies. So I don't know if that works on like journalists. However, cookies work.
The only thing that reporters run for is free pizza in the newsroom. So pizza or cookies in the newsroom, that's a great way to get in, I think.
Brilliant. So thinking about, we could sit here for days talking about publishers, and it's such a massive, complex area, particularly, Google News surfaces is not just normal search. But if you had to give our listeners 3 top advice that you would give for anybody who's working for a publisher, what would it be?
Read a lot. Read everything your publication writes. understand the topics and editorial themes that your organization cares about. That's probably 1 and 2, because then you'll know what is a good fit and how to put your brand spin on a particular topic. I'm sort of the opinion that there's really not a ton of topics that are like off limits. Like, the Globe is a national news organization that primarily thinks about and focuses on business and investing. That doesn't mean that we can't cover a pop culture moment and or that the Globe can't cover a pop culture moment and find success. And the Guardian is, potentially left of center and has a distinct perspective on the world, I would say. That doesn't mean that there are things that are off limits or things that we can't cover. We just have to find the Guardian way of approaching a story. Or, when I was at the Globe, it was always okay, but is this a Globe story? And if it isn't a Globe story, or like, how do we find the Globe angle and the Globe way in to cover a particular topic? I don't think there's too many things that are like totally off limits. As long as you can find a way of covering something that your audience won't immediately click off of or hold you in less esteem because they saw that headline on your site. So I think reading everything that you write in order to understand what your brand cares about is number 1. And then number 2 is figuring out, okay, having done all that work, what is the particular angle or focus that I can take and apply as a framework to pitching stories and thinking about content.
Brilliant.
My number 1 would be, don't freak out about Google algorithms. And I know that we'll get into that a little bit more. But I think that especially for publishers, Google's volatile. It'll always be volatile. There's a lot going on. But especially when it comes to the reaction to algorithm updates, I would really strongly encourage publishers to think a little bit less about like what is happening on Google and more what is happening with my audience. Especially just because with everything, that's happening with social, different changes in referral of traffic from there, the rise of Reddit, things like that. The second thing would be take a look at what Google's serving for the key topics and themes that you're looking at. And by that, I don't mean like look up NBA draft. I mean, look up how other things in your area is happening. So does Google tend to favor more sports-specific websites for something that's a little bit more niche? Do they tend to go big publications for a really big marquee story, or are they going more local? Play around with a VPN, especially if you're a national publication or something that has more of a national drive. There's some more niche publications like The Walrus in Canada that tends to focus on climate and environment, and they tend to battle with the big publications, but they have a more niche subset. So how do they compete in, British Columbia versus Toronto versus Halifax? Those would be my first number 1 and number 2. And then for number 3 advice, I would say, don't be afraid to fail. And this is one I love to tell everyone. Experimenting in SEO is the reason that we love this job. You get to try something, and if it sticks, everyone gets really excited about it. If it doesn't stick, people tend to be like, oh crap, I'm not good at my job. I don't know what I'm doing. This story failed. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to connect with an audience. And if we find different ways to do it and we fail, okay, well, what's the next thing we're going to try? And you brought up about the developers, earlier. And like, what are other things that you can do with your developers that gets them involved in what the day-to-day journalism is? Are they, creating a cool interactive that you want to show up on search? And at first it doesn't show up, but you keep working on the code. Those small things, again, it's all about buy-in, and it's all about making the whole newsroom and the whole organization really want to buy into what you're going to do. And I would say, like, working in very different publications that I have, those have been the 3 like mainstays across the board.
I just want to add on to what Shelby said, which is on the Google algorithm, like having your own North Star in an organization, I think is really important. Like, what is the thing that your organization really, really cares about? And maybe it's not just page views. Maybe it's just the thing that you're most keen on is engagement metrics. Or if you're a paywalled publication, obviously like the Globe had a really hard paywall. And so the North Star was, what are the things that are going to convert? I think actually working for an organization with a paywall is kind of a blessing. Like, it is frustrating because it's like, I want this to rank on Google, but then people are going to hit a paywall, and is that a bad experience, and so on and so forth. But it actually really clarifies the things that, like, if you can see, Exactly. Like it clarifies what are the things that readers value and what are the things that people are willing to pay for. And that is a North Star of like, what are the things that people are going to find really, really valuable? I think that's a great North Star that sort of untethers you from worrying too much, like Shelby said, about individual algorithm updates or individual small day-to-day things. I think having big picture, what you're working towards broadly, I think is always a really useful and valuable thing too.
I think that's definitely something that's kind of happened recently, I think, with more like SEOs. I mean, perhaps more kind of inexperienced SEOs or SEOs that haven't been in the industry that long, is that they kind of experience their first kind of, year or 18 months of turmoil, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, SEO, I can't do SEO anymore because all my traffic's disappeared. And it's like, well, yeah, but SEO is one, it's one channel, and you've got all of these other, so it's almost like it is re-emphasized that point, I think, in the last kind of 18 months, really, is that, yeah, it's like you say, it's having your own kind of, like North Star. It's like, well, what are we really trying to do for our audience again? It's like, well, SEO is one channel, but what else are we trying to do, in different channels, and how do we serve that audience in different medium?
Yeah.
Oh,
Someone referred to like, if you're only focused on reach, so if you're only focused on page views, that isn't really like useful traffic. It's sort of like a sugar rush, because those are people who are coming in because they're interested in like one particular thing, but they're not going to stick around. And I think, like you're saying, the last 18 months have really showed us that like that sugar rush is just that. It's a short-term thing that doesn't necessarily build you towards your long-term North Star goals.
Yeah, I guess I think the page views thing is obviously, like, the page views probably suits obviously the businesses that are built on kind of, the page view values of like, well, if I get a page view, I get some affiliate income, or I get a page view, I get like an ad revenue, whatever, right? So that's obviously why that's a KPI for them. But obviously, I think that's the difference, is that more developed business models and kind of more, established businesses, that's the thing, is that they have, page views. Yeah, they're great in terms of the vanity of metrics of page views, but actually what are we really trying to connect with our audience on, and what value are we trying to provide them?
Yeah, exactly that.
And we talk a lot,
Yeah,
Jesse and I, about the funnel. Like, we talk about the funnel all the time. Like, top of the funnel audience is amazing because you need those people to come to your publication or your newsroom or whatever and learn about your audience. But 9 times out of 10, that person's not going to subscribe on your first click. And you need a reason to push them down, whether that's a newsletter, whether that's, something on social that's just really connecting with them, whether that's, some type of community, and then eventually finding some way to connect with them. And I think that a lot of the times, newsrooms especially are so focused on, we need more people, we need to get the biggest click number, we need to, what are the clicks on this story, what are the traffic? And it's okay, but how long did that story resonate? How long did that story actually have traffic? How much did that drive to other stories, things like that we don't really think about, because we're so worried about, again, that North Star of being the page views. And I think if the bigger publications or the more successful publications that look at it as, okay, there's one form of traffic coming from search, but how is that changing? How is that adjusting? I think about Reddit all the time. Like, I really truly think that there's like a gold mine in Reddit. And it's just because we haven't really thought about it further, because we're so focused, again, on like the sugar rush.
No, I completely understand. And the search has changed. The way that search looks like has changed as well. And you have this blending of channels that now happens right there on page one. So it's you just can't separate it anymore, I think. So one of the things that you mentioned is obviously the algorithm changes. Now, nobody likes them. And we know that there's been, particularly with publishers, the last few, I think they've rolled out now the auto one also, for the spam auto one, that we're monitoring for some of our clients as well. Now, what are your opinions? We spoke a little bit about it. You shouldn't focus just on that. You need to have your North Star. But what do you do to kind of manage an algorithm update, to monitor it, and not to freak out if anything happens?
Yeah, first step probably in that is managing expectations and being in constant conversation with key stakeholders. So communicating to leadership, and to not just to leadership, but to people around you, that this is how Google changes. These are the things that we look for in an algorithm update, and here's how we potentially can think about response to an algorithm update. So I think the first thing is just communicating to people around you and above you that this is sort of par for the course. This is to be expected. Like, don't freak out immediately. Like, there are things that we can think about and we can do. But I think the first thing is like setting expectations and making sure that people know that, if your traffic changes on a given day, like, it's not the end of the world. Like, the sky is not falling. Like, this is something that we can manage. I think that's probably the first thing I would say. But
yeah, I would totally agree. And I think that the other thing to that is just understanding that a lot of times we're very quick to blame the algorithm. And I'm not saying that we should not blame the algorithm. Like, Google's a mess, but we tend to look at the algorithm as like, that's the reason. That's the reason the Google traffic has dropped. That's the reason that we're not being shown up as much. And I think that oftentimes we freak out about it, and then blame it. And so I think taking that step back of saying, okay, communicating to your stakeholders, there is a change in the algorithm. It could take X amount of days or X amount of weeks to roll out. The next thing is saying, okay, well, within the 24 to 48 hours where you do see volatility, is it seasonality? Is it the news cycle? Is it, actually the algorithm? What are the other publications in your area seeing? That's probably one of the best things to look at too, because if you're being hit and singled out, especially in a publication world, there's either a reason, probably reputation or a spam or something like that, or there's something else going on. And so I think that oftentimes we need to take the step back of almost taking the journalistic approach. Like, don't freak out immediately, get the facts, find out exactly what's going on, and then look at what else is happening in the environment. Because especially with some of these bigger algorithm updates that are happening right now, sometimes Google gets it wrong. And it's all of a sudden, 5 publishers are gone. There was an indexing issue a week ago, literally, that affected the New York Times, the Guardian. I believe the Journal got affected. A bunch of us were really affected by this, the Athletic, and we weren't indexing at all. And everyone started freaking out, being like, is it us? It is us. It is us. And we turned around and we were like, no, it's Google. But we didn't know that until we did the investigation. And so it goes both ways in the sense of just having that moment of take a second. Tomorrow's going to still happen. You're still going to have your job, and we just need to decide, is this Google? Is this us? And what is the appropriate way to take? And oftentimes it's just continue status quo because Google's trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Take a beat. Don't panic. Tell people what you know, what you don't know. Be very clear about things that you're still investigating, and just keep in constant conversation and communication with people so that they don't have the opportunity to freak out.
Nice one. I have about like 20 more questions, and I could be sitting here till probably tomorrow and asking you all of those questions. As a final kind of thing before we go into room 404, shall we have a very quick chat about evergreen content? I know that's a biggie when you're talking about publishers. What are some of the tips that you can share with our publishing SEOs around those content pieces that are considered to be evergreen?
We've written so many newsletters about Evergreen. We're obviously big proponents and fans of it. I think Evergreen is good because it gives you the opportunity to have reader interest and traffic on topics that aren't tied to the news cycle. So for publishers, most of your traffic, or no, I shouldn't say most, but for many publishers, a large portion of your traffic is just going to be tied to the day's news. And so you need something to happen, or you need to write an investigation or write a story or have a column in order to get any traffic. And so that is obviously terrific because we should be reporting on the news and we should be columnizing and we should be doing investigations. But the flip of that is like it's tied to the cycle that you only have so much control over. I think the beauty of Evergreen and recirculation as a tactic and a strategy on your site and on search is that you can sort of offset some of that volatility by having really strong content on key topic areas that your brand really cares about and that resonate with audience. Like something being evergreen is probably an indication that this is something that your readers really care about and that you could potentially do more of in order to raise sort of the baseline of traffic that you get on your site.
The one other thing I'll just quickly say is I need to bring it up. I'm sorry. In the US especially, just keep in mind AI. particularly for the Evergreen side of things. It's obviously a very small microcosm of things. Like I think it's like down to 14 or 10% of all searches right now. So it's a very small amount, but we have seen that Evergreen is the one that's being affected, particularly for big news publishers. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be forever. We've already seen that the AI examples changing, where they're putting the links at the top of the response now, and then the responses below. Like everything's changing still. But I do think that I would be doing a disservice to all of your listeners if I did not bring that up. So just keeping that in mind and looking at how that changes in your particular niche. We haven't been affected in sports, but we've seen it in news. And so I think it's very important to also take that step back, like we said, and really understanding how Google responds to your content, to your publication. But also to Jessie's point, like really understanding what are those stories that are going to hold you long term, but that you can return to consistently. Like my favorite evergreen pieces are pieces that truly are evergreen in your nature. Like for every single time we talk about a story, or we talk about an injury, we have an injury explainer. And so that explainer is literally truly evergreen. Timelines are some of my favorite evergreen pieces because they put into scope what you're already talking about in context. So just a link in that story, and really understanding the way that your site hierarchy and like site structure works so that you can link to those explainers is probably one of the best things that you could do for yourselves in a search environment. Because as we've learned this year, links and clicks are still a very high signal for Google. So if you're able to, link those explainers and give your audience more information, how that'll help you in the long run as well, regardless of whatever Google's doing with AI.
Yeah, I really think that you can think about Evergreen as an entirely on-site tactic too, right? Like Shelby was saying, like if you cover incremental updates on a key thing, having an explainer on that key topic, like the example of having an explainer that goes through what is an Achilles heel injury and explaining what that means for a player, how long that might be out. Like that is just a great resource for your reader. So even if it's totally divorced from search environments and people coming to you from Google, like that's just like a really high value piece of utility or service journalism for your reader. So you could even think about Evergreen totally separate from SEO and just think about it plainly as an on-site tactic to keep showing your value to your readers. Like I read Vulture a lot because I just really love lists. I love things that are ranked. Like it just, when I need a little break in the day, I go vulture.com and I click on whatever ranking is new on their homepage. And a lot of the time, those ranked lists are things that they put together 5 or 6 years ago of like, here's every Ryan Gosling movie ranked. And they just updated it with one new movie because he's in The Hitman, The Fall Man, The Fall Guy, whatever that Emily Blunt movie is. It was terrific. It was very, very funny. But like, and that's sort of like a lower effort, high reward thing that you can do as a publisher, especially if you're strapped for resources. Investing the time up front to create a really great service, a really great piece of valuable content for your readers is worth that investment because you can get this you can get this return on it long term with smaller updates and smaller pieces of work.
And how is that, like, just as a quick question on that, is that like going back to the the Achilles injury or something like that, is that how like a common way is if you kind of generate new content ideas as well? Is that like if you've got like a story come in and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we need a page for that, does that give you the incentive that, okay, we go and create that page for that news story to go live?
Like you have a new story and then you've got an explainer on the side? About
like would that give you the incentive to say like create a new page, and like you might, if you get a news story come in and you think that okay, well, there's like 4 or 5 pages here that we need to create, is that something that would happen, or is it usually just like a like, oh, we can create like 1 page, 2 pages here?
I think that's a great question, and I think that goes back to the idea of like SEO as an audience first discipline and a reader first, something that you have a reader first perspective. And I would say the answer to that question is like, if you've got a news line, I think the question to ask is like, would my readers benefit from having a second file that's an explainer? So if I have a news line on Bronny getting an Achilles and ankle injury in his first game, like, is it a value to my readers to have that? Sorry, I keep using sports examples and that's not my area of expertise.
She's trying to go into mine.
I know.
You're doing really well, Jessie. You're doing really well.
You're doing really well.
Let's say, okay, here's an example. Like if the National announces a new album, the National, my favorite band, if they announce a new album and I'm doing a little write-up on they've got a new album, here's the track list, or like, here's the album, like, do I think like that, is that one piece of content or several pieces of content? Because what you can do is like write up the new album with their press release and include the art that they're going to put out for the new album. But then you could also do separate that's like, here's just the track list, or here's just the ranking of every national song that they've ever produced, or here's the ranking of every album that they've ever produced. And then from there, like that's one, that could either be 1 line or 5. And it really just depends on like, what is your niche? How much will my readers show up for all this content I'm creating? And is it a value for them? Is it a service for them?
Yeah, I think it's like, I like these little ecosystems that kind of build out, and like, that's the thing, is that these topics that kind of generate. And I think what I always try to like to do is that if you're ever talking to a client, you just use a big news publisher as an example, because it's like, because the internal linking kind of management of things and how they're all linked together is just always a great example to get people into that mindset of how they should kind of look at their own content as well. Is that, of course, obviously it has to be relevant. You have to obviously have loads of these caveats about who the client is and what, but just that learning and teaching about, well, actually, look, this is like a really good example of how you should think about internally linking in your own website, you know.
Totally.
So no, it's really interesting how, you kind of think about these stories, but as actually like, you know, as a whole kind of subtopic or whatever it needs to be, you know. It's really
I was going to say the tree analogy really quickly, if you're okay with that, because I think that this is like the best way to think about it. Is Claudio, my boss, Cabrera, he teaches it as like it's a tree, and thinking about the tree, the trunk of the tree as the topic or the main theme or the main story, and then there's all these branches that are breaking out, but all the branches are connected. And so when you're creating your main story, he uses the Notre Dame fire as a really great example. So the Notre Dame fire happens, your main story, your newser is the trunk. And then it's, you know, what happened? Are there victims? What's going to happen to all of this? What is the, like, you know, recovery? What is the donations? All these things. And the Globe and Mail does this really well too, where they have these explainers, and they're called What We Know So Far, and they build out this out thing. And then you've got all of these additional pieces of branches of analysis or, you know, content. You know, what does this mean for everyone? And you're right, because it's an entire branch of stories within one topic. And now you're building out not only the depth of coverage that you have, but your expertise around it. And the more that it's linked together, the more that you're able to surface this, the more that you're actually the expert. And then Google will start seeing that. Your readers definitely recognize that. Yeah. And you're able to build out that expertise. And I think that's a great way to sell your clients too, is just thinking about 1 = 2 = 3, because you're able to just keep that storyline going.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how search actually works. I mean, if you're like really thinking about how ranking works, and, you know, we've seen in the last leak as well, you know, I'm not saying that site authority is something that is the same as Moz or any of the other tools, but it's all about kind of building this topical relevance and a corpus of pieces around something to say, ultimately, it's about saying, hey, Google, you know, we know our stuff in this particular topic and covering it in depth, but with the reader in mind and thinking about what's that next step in the journey that they want to take, the whole experience. So, no, it's brilliant.
And can I also just say, it doesn't always require starting from zero and to create new content. We had, I'll use an example from the Globe. There was a spate of car thefts in Toronto and across Canada, and the rate of car thefts across the country really, really had just gone up by a wild amount. And so we had our reporter write at the Globe. I keep saying our, and it's only been 6 months, but the Globe's business reporter wrote a very straight news story about this, and then went on the podcast, the Globe's Decibel podcast, which is terrific. You should listen to it, to talk about the story. And in the story, it was mainly a news story, but we had a couple little sections talking to experts about here's some things that you can do in order to prevent your car getting stolen. And then that was the focus of the podcast. And I looked at the investigation and I listened to the podcast and I thought, okay, we have this great advice about how to prevent car thefts, but we haven't put that on its own file. So all that we did was go into the transcript of the file, which we already had, and pulled out these key tips for how to prevent car theft, and put that into its own file and treated it as service journalism. And it was super successful. And then suddenly, where we had one piece of content previously and where, in a traditional newsroom, you might just have that one really great investigation or that one really great story. Suddenly we had 3 pieces of content and we had 3 different avenues for readers to engage with the same topic.
Yeah, exactly. Repurposing. And that kind of applies to every industry. And these days with AI, like, I do not think like AI is going to take over our jobs. And I'm more like on the Ed Citron type of skewed in that direction in terms of how this little bubble is going to burst. But what it is good at is kind of summarizing things, pulling main points and stuff like that. So if you're doing a podcast, obviously you're going to run it through ChatGPT, try and get a write-up out of it. So yeah, we do it quite a lot here, to varying degrees of success. You don't want to like pose that. Honestly, sometimes it just hallucinates completely, but it's a good resource.
But just to go back to what Shelby was saying about experimentation and failure, it's like not everything that we do and try is going to be a success. So I think like, had that service sidebar not worked, it doesn't necessarily mean that a service sidebar to a story in a podcast is a bad idea. It just means maybe we wrote the wrong headline or had the wrong treatment, or maybe we were too late in the cycle and we missed our window of opportunity. So I think just to come back to the idea of doing a postmortem on projects big and small, I think it's good. It could be, it could be a Slack post. It could be a line in an email saying like, we tried this, it didn't work. Here's what we think. Here's what we would change going forward. So everything is just really an opportunity to experiment and to learn and to try to find new ways to connect to audience.
Brilliant. Thank you. This is a great spot to kind of end the main discussion on a high. Now let's bring it back low into the room 404. Now we've spoken
it's
like
not
finishing.
Low. We get to banish things.
We banish things. Actually, yeah. When you look at it that way, then it's actually on a high. So room 404 is basically a space where we put things that have annoyed us, things that we don't like. It's room 404 because I think we always give it a chance to come out. Jessie, what is your room 404 entry?
I would say something that we need to do away with is maybe it's personal pet peeve, but I hate being served a pop-up to sign up for a newsletter or to subscribe to something when I'm first landing on a site. We talk a lot about the audience funnel, about moving readers from not knowing anything about your brand to knowing something about your brand and having a reason to stick around to then conversion at the bottom. And I really am frustrated by sites and publications that go from you're brand new to the site, here's something to subscribe right away before I've read a headline, before I've consumed an entire story, before I know anything about a publication. I really think that we as publishers and we as newsrooms and brands really have to earn our right to the audience. We have to earn our right to people's attention. We're all so busy, and to presume that because I'm on your site, I immediately want to sign up for your newsletter is something I would do away with. I think we need to take an audience first mindset and think about, okay, how do I convince someone that signing up for my newsletter is worth their time and attention, rather than you land on my site and therefore you want all my content. Here's a floating video. Here's a sign up form. Here's 17 push notifications and alerts and like all the bells and whistles, even though you just landed on my site. It's like if you knock on someone's door and they're like just imagine like you're knocking on someone's door and an untrained puppy is jumping all over you. That's sometimes what it feels like. It's like, I love a doodle, but I don't want the doodle jumping on me and trying to lick my face before I've even like met the dog properly, So to use a really terrible metaphor, I think that we should do away with asking people for people's time and attention before we've actually earned it.
Amen. I agree with that one. Shelby, what's your 404?
I just need to say really quickly, I love that you literally likened it to a puppy, because I'm getting a dog tomorrow, and all I can think about is this puppy that's going to be jumping up and down on Jessie the first time that he meets her. So,
that's the exception. I'll say that's my one exception. I'm fine with your dog jumping over me.
Well, fine. It won't tell you to sign up for a newsletter, so you're good. I have two things that have been really on my mind. One of them is more like reactive, and then the other one is an actual thing. So the reactive one is I'm really really annoyed at the amount of people that are freaking out about AI. And you actually brought it up, Emina, of just like AI's always kind of been there. Like we can use it in a way that's good. And like Jessie's really great about this. She uses AI in a way that just makes her job easier. And I think that that's what we need to kind of look at is like AI has always in a way been in our lives. It's always going to be part of our lives. It's just understanding that this is still a tool, one, made by humans, so it's always going to be behind, but two, that has only a certain amount of capabilities based on whatever LLM it's based off of, language learning model. And it's very frustrating. I get it, especially in a world like search where you are so beholden to Google and the traffic that it drives and the money that it gives you. I 100% understand it. But we tend to get so freaked out about something that we don't even know the answer to. And I think it gets us a little bit too much in our minds versus let's actually try and see what's actually happening. You need logic in this world, in this field, to say, hey, it's still a company, but at the same time, the company is not fully understanding what's going on. That's my number one. Stop freaking out about AI. Two, I want to throw GA4 and all of its properties and all of its events and all of its triggers and everything overnight.
It's already there, Shelby. Shelby, that one is already
like
there.
That should be in a 410. It should never come back. No, I'm definitely that person that is. I think that when they went from Universal Analytics to GA4, they really hurt a lot of publishers, especially because they just don't have the time to understand all of the things. I think it's great for consultants. There's an ability that if you really take your time, GA4 could do it. But I think that a lot of publications that were just looking for simple analytics and data really are losing out, and Google hurt themselves, and GA4 just doesn't have the capabilities. So that's a 410 all day.
All right, I think we can all agree on GA4 being a 410. I think it's been in a 404 long enough now. It needs to transition. Enough people have said it.
It's got a lot of votes anyway.
Yeah. Before we end, I would like to invite everybody to look at the amazing WTF SEO newsletter. Whether you're working for a publisher, obviously that is like your primary audience, but I would recommend it for anybody because it really does apply across industries. It's an amazing resource for journalists, for SEOs, for basically anybody interested in this area, in search. And thank you so much for coming today on the podcast.
It's been an epic podcast. Yeah, it's been great. It's been really good conversations. Yeah, thank you both. Where can people find you on social media or online?
Our website is seoforjournalism.com. We also have a Slack channel that we would encourage people to sign up for. The link for that is on seoforjournalism.com. And then we're both on Twitter and LinkedIn under our full names.
Fantastic. That's great. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Fantastic.
And we'll put links
Thanks for having us.
below. And
this was great.
Thanks so much. Yeah, great. And hopefully we'll be able to do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, everyone. Emina, do you want to say thank you to the audience?
Yeah, thank you very much for listening. We're hoping you'll join us for the next SEOs Getting Coffee. And yeah, have a great day, everyone.
See you later. Bye.